So let's get started in this conversation. It's such an important conversation. Pre-pandemic, this was the thing to be looking at, but it is not the end all and be all of all of our clinical conversations. So let's just not forget that the number one killer for many modern countries is still cardiovascular disease. So we're so excited to really enter into this new era of managing cardiometabolic risk. Now notice I use the word cardiometabolic. That's a little bit of a hint that we're going to be talking about something broader than just cardiovascular risk, which is, for lack of a better expression, the old conversation. We've got some key objectives to go through. I actually believe that you guys are great readers. I'm not going to read to you. I'm going to help you see, just know that this is what we're going to do. But let's get started. Now, we're going to start with a telescopic view of this conversation. And that is to just start out kind of big. I want you to kind of relax, lean back in your chair if you need to, and just take this part in as a warm-up, if you will. So you furious note takers, put the pencil or the pen down. The goal is just to gain perspective here. So the first thing that I'd like to make sure that we're all kind of tuned into is that the old conversation about cardiovascular risk was about the circulatory system. You remember this in biology class. You've got your circulatory and your respiratory and your skeletal. And we really looked at the body as different compartmentalized systems. The problem is the body doesn't operate in unique systems that are independent from each other. In fact, they come together in a matrix, if you will. They're interconnected like a web. And what we're focusing on in this functional medicine talk and conference is the transport system. Now, the transport, kind of makes sense for the circulatory system. Yeah, you've got these blood vessels, these lymphatic vessels that are carrying things from one place to another, but you also have transport, if you take it as a broader definition of transport, happening, let's say, from outside of the cell, inside the cell, right? Like if you're thinking about your insulin receptors, that's moving information or glucose with the receptor from outside the cell inside the cell in order to be utilized for energy. That's a form of transport. And obviously, there's all other types of communicators that govern how transportation happens in the body. Notice I didn't say circulation. So the new language I'd like you to consider is transportation. And the other era that we want to bring you into, if you're not already in it, is this idea of an ecosystem, not looking at the human body as this closed fixed circuit or system, as though it's not connected to the outside or as though there are not things on the inside that influence each other, right? We've got to look at different layers of ecosystems that the human body is influenced by. And we can be telescopic about an ecosystem, or we can be quite local about an ecosystem. So for example, we can look at an artery and say, that in the old conversation, the ecosystem that we were looking at was really just the inside of the artery or the lumen. So we were really just glorified luminologists, if you will, having the conversation of how stenotic is this blood vessel. The new conversation is not just about the opening, if you will, of the lumen, the patency of the lumen. It's about what the heck is happening in the arterial wall. What's the ecosystem of the arterial wall doing that influences what's going to happen in the lumen? And then what's happening outside of this artery? What is the extra arterial ecosystem that influences what happens to the lumen and the artery? That is what we mean by the ecosystem conversation. Mimi and Yusuf will be bringing in the conversation of low density lipoprotein, helping you understand this truth that size does matter. Yes, it does when it relates to LDL. We're going to talk about things that likely you may have heard about, but we're going to get to know them so profoundly that you can really leverage them. Like they're so part of you that it's just natural in your implementation of healing at your office space. Now, this is probably a shocker, but did you know that poor lifestyle contributes to risk? Now, of course, I'm saying that to be quite sarcastic. Of course, you know that, but it's kind of interesting that it's not until recently that institutions that govern our standard of care are really taking this seriously, saying it needs to be a part of the guidelines because the data is so evident that lifestyle matters. So whether it's about the conversation of nutrition, which of course is what most of your patients are interested in having with you, if it's the data around the Mediterranean diet, if it's the data around the impact of stress on the cardiometabolic risk profile that you have, if it's about physical activity, it's about sleep, all these things together, if you will, constitute lifestyle ecosystem signals that then impact cardiometabolic risk. So we have to have that conversation. And for sure, it needs to be beyond nutrition. Nutrition is vital. Absolutely. We're going to dive into it. Michael Stone is going to be our in-house guru, as well as our other speakers, of course, about helping you shift your patients to a more plant-based diet. Do I mean that everybody has to become vegetarian or vegan? No, I'm not suggesting that. We've got to meet people where they're at. So how do you engage your patients in this information so that they're willing to put that as an ecosystem signal in their life day to day? We're going to go and bust this open when we talk about nutrition. You know, so many times the nutrition conversation is like, eat healthy, eat organic, eat your veggies, you know, but we want to help people understand in this conference that not only is the quality of the food that you are taking in or advising your patients about taking in important, but the quantity is an important aspect. And then other aspects like timing. We're going to be talking about fasting. So for example, in this diagram, what I will call an anchor diagram slide, we see that the impact of the standard American diet, sad to say, is not just calories, although calories do lead to maybe some increased central adiposity. But did you know the quality of these calories can damage our intestinal lining, leading it to be vulnerable to permeability? And that then creates this very common scenario called metabolic endotoxemia. That's going to trigger inflammation. The quality of the foods and the quantity of the foods can absolutely disrupt our microbiome, leading to dysbiosis as a different mechanism of inflammation. And so you get this immune activation and dysregulation that then is a constant bath that your genes are bathing in. So we want to broaden that conversation around nutrition because, listen, obesity is definitely an impact of poor nutrition. In fact, it's commonly said that we are overfed and undernourished as a human population moving forth. So we want to be able to mitigate the trends of obesity, but responsibly. And we want to bring in this larger conversation about social determinants of health. Now more than ever in history, we are becoming more and more aware about how race, access, just languages spoken, the community that you're in, your gender, the food security aspects of your life play a role in the development of cardiovascular or cardiometabolic conditions. We cannot ignore that the human body lives in this social ecosystem that very much determines the potential for health. We're going to absolutely blow up the conversation around exercise, and not just to get nitty gritty about the science, although we definitely want to invite you into some scientific evidence. We want to really engage you so that you can partner with your patients to bring about this most potent anti-inflammatory signal into their lives, into their lifestyle choice. So bringing not just exercise like slapping on some spandex and going to a gym kind of exercise. We're talking about daily movement, how to really reduce sedentary behavior, because there is so much prospective data that suggests that just getting humans to be biologically human and move like we were meant to would make a big difference with overall mortality. So let's start that conversation in this new era. And it just would be supremely short-sighted if we did not have a conversation about the impact of stress and how stress mechanisms can promote atherosclerosis as well as arrhythmias, metabolic dysfunction, I mean, all of it. And there is, of course, a little bit of extra stress going on in the world these days for many people. So we are going to, with the help of Mimi, really dive into what are the systems biology dysfunctions that occur from acute and chronic stress and how we can help our patients, and let's just say ourselves, because we should consider ourselves patients as well, bring about resiliency. That's going to be a theme for our conference, in fact, how to transform perception in order to reduce our reactivity to stress as a method for reducing overall risk and improving quality of life. One of the things that I always say out loud to my patients, especially in the early visits they have with me, is, you know, I get that you want to be healthy, but I would assume that you actually want to be happy. And your goal is to be healthy because you believe it's a gateway to happiness. So let's just make sure that we don't get so fixated on biological health that we forget that larger goal that people have about just happy ecosystem from outside all the way in. So how are we going to get here? Well, luckily, I have this amazing crew who is going to be our tour guides to this vibrancy and to this health potential. So we have myself, Dr. Yusuf El-Yaman, Dr. Mimi Guarneri, and Dr. Michael Stone. We are so excited to be able to put together, to sew together a quilt of information and implementation guidelines or tips to be able to take this clinical information and then make it into the real world as results. Because one of the things that Dr. David Jones, who I just warmly call the mother of functional medicine, he once said, listen, if all we do is talk about this and all we do is know this stuff, it really doesn't do the full service that we have as an intention for our patients. We have to get ourselves from the knowing stage into the doing stage, because that's when results will occur. And that's why we're in this conversation, right? I mean, we are healers first and foremost. It's in us. It's this drive, it's this passion, it's this just version of us that we cannot silence. That's why we're in this. And I'm so excited to be with you as we have this conversation. So again, just looking at the big picture here, remember that the things you may have learned from the conventional focus of looking at risk factors like blood pressure and blood sugar, and cholesterol, these are important. And yes, a diagnosis is surely important, but our conversation, the new era of cardiometabolic health, is really about identifying and then actually addressing these modifiable underlying etiologies of dysfunction. Specifically, I'll call them ecosystem dysfunctions, right? So what we do is we use our resources that we've been trained in. Hopefully, most of you have gone through the AFMCP coursework, that 5-day intensive that just rocks your world, gets you like just slapped on with ecosystem knowledge that you just knew maybe intuitively, but just did not think, how can I leverage this? So we're going to use the timeline and the matrix in order to help you understand how to view your patient from this new era conversation perspective. We're going to continue to delve into how to leverage epigenetics, the science of epigenetics, meaning how can we help you take into consideration the genetics of your patient the environment or the ecosystem of that patient and their daily lifestyle choices, i.e. epigenetic signals, that will then influence what their system's biology does. So for many of our patients, dealing with cardiometabolic risks, they have these very common systems biology dysfunctions, whether it's related to inflammation, oxidative stress, insulin dysfunction. Notice I did not say glucose. We said insulin dysfunction, vascular or autoimmune dysfunction, and those things happening under the surface. Remember that iceberg under the surface. This is happening sometimes for years or decades before you see the surfacing of an abnormal fasting glucose or an LDL cholesterol that's too high, et cetera, et cetera. In functional medicine, in this new era of cardiometabolic health, we want to go upstream. We want to go leverage the environment, leverage the lifestyle in order to manipulate the system's biology so it can be in a favorable setting to allow the epigenetic potential of the patient be at its highest expression of health. So what's interesting is that conventional or modern medicine seems to be catching up with functional medicine, slowly but surely. It's very reassuring. So in November 2018, the American Heart Association and the American College of Cardiology released guidelines that said, hey, doctors, clinicians, please consider healthy living or lifestyle modification and prevention as a toolkit item for preventing heart attacks and strokes. Shocker, but it's official now as of 2018 here in the States. It may be already there in your country. So in order to leverage lifestyle, you and I know that we cannot give a handout. We cannot say something pithy like eat right and exercise and just assume that the patient says, yes, ma'am, and then just rocks it at home. We just know that doesn't happen for most patients. So it takes an ecosystem, a community ecosystem, in order to get the knowing of lifestyle into the doing of lifestyle. Now, what we have prepared for you as a team is a cardiometabolic clinical decision tree. So as we're moving through the conference, you might find this interesting to look at from time to time. It's kind of a way to pull back and say, okay, where am I in my education? What am I learning? Where does it plot out on this decision tree? And so what you'll see is it very much follows what you may have learned in AFMCP in terms of the go to it. We've just modified it for this advanced practice module. So yes, you're going to gather yourself, and then you're going to gather some important clinical information, whether it's through labs or clinical exam or questionnaires. And we've got that listed out here for you, the different tools you might use in the gather phase. And then of course, you're going to organize that information and you're going to plot it out on the matrix, trying to see, hey, which one seems to have a lot of stuff written on it? Which one do I maybe need to work on as I'm working through my timeline and matrix development? We kind of have a cheat sheet right here for you. So this could be another anchor reference guide for you through this conference. Again, it's not fully comprehensive because we can't shove that much information on a one sheet piece of paper, but it might trigger the themes that we've been talking about. So you could always keep this in your exam room or have it, available for easy reference so that it can jog your memory about common things in the ATM you might pick up from the timeline, or common things in the lifestyle foundation that you might pick up from a history or a questionnaire, and then how that timeline and the lifestyle come together, if you will, in the middle, which is this clinical imbalances section in white, to cause effects that you can then use as signs or symptoms of cardiometabolic dysfunction. So once you organize things on the matrix, then you're going to start to get a sense of, okay, which ones are the big nodes I need to look into? And then what you want to do is make sure that jives with the patient. So we want you to tell it back to the patient. Like, I really think your gut, when you started out with these chronic ear infections, you got a bunch of antibiotics here, and then you had acne and you got a bunch of antibiotics. You seem to keep having gut issues. It seems to be a big theme. And so I think it's the source of your inflammation that's driving your insulin dysfunction. That might be what you tell them back. And then what you do in that telling is you're engaging that patient in partnership, like you're getting the buy-in. Because if the patient's like, yes, I completely agree with you. Well, then if you ask them to do the elimination diet, you're more likely to get some compliance because you've got this therapeutic partnership developed in that tell. So then after the tell, you and the patient start to look at the different categories of systems biology dysfunction that we're going to share. And you see them listed here. And let me just tell you, you probably know this, they don't bucket all simply in one nice little insulin bucket. I mean, they have a bit of insulin and a little bit of immune, plus a touch of vascular. So the goal is to really just partner with the patient and understand, what does the ecosystem allow? Like, is this the right time for elimination diet? Is the month of December with all the holidays the right time to give up gluten for this patient? The answer might be, heck yes. Or it might be a very obvious no way. So that's the ecosystem that we want you to always have in your mind as you're working and partnering with your patient. And at some point you all decide, yeah, let's start something. So you initiate the treatments. Usually we like to work with lifestyle as one of those for sure. So you're just focusing on lifestyle, picking which ones do you want to leverage in which capacity. We've got some ideas here in that decision tree. And then obviously you are going to maybe order some labs, maybe if you need some information, here's some ideas for labs that you can consider ordering in the different categories. And then of course, because it's not called go to it, it's called go to it. You're going to work down the initiate until it's time for you to consider, hey, I need to track progress with this patient. I mean, that's a key to engagement as I see it with my patients, especially those patients who love data in order to continue good behaviors, right? So let's go to it as it relates to cardiometabolic health. All right. So we made it through this decision tree. You made it through the go to it and the track features and everything I talked about. It might feel like, oh, we're going to learn this all in 2.5 days. It's always seems impossible until it's done. So we are really so excited to be with you. We, as a community of educators, love being with you. There's definitely a certain deficit in doing this virtually, but we have some great ideas of how to make this fun. So just like Leah said, this is us. This is 685 of us coming together to transform what healing looks like on this planet. And I just am so honored and privileged that you took time today and this weekend, because I do know that part of your mental, emotional, spiritual, and social health is to have downtime. So I just acknowledge the strength and courage and dedication and commitment you have to be with us these 2.5 days. We promise to make it worth your while. Keep communicating with us because we are partnering with you. We really are excited to make a huge impact for you and your ecosystem.